Good morning, folks. Good morning. Brought something extra up. Hold on a second. Let me just get one last. I am a fan of coffee. I'm sorry. And this is a good cup right here. This is. You ever have that blend? It's just a good blend. Everything's just right. Just enough sugar. Just enough. Hold on. Oh yeah, that's good. Okay. Yeah. I want to welcome you this morning. Great to have you. Really, is everybody all right? Doing well? Excited about being a Christian? Gathering together to celebrate with the saints, to encourage one another? I sure hope so. It's great to have you all here, worshiping the Lord together in spirit and in truth. The visitors, we're thankful that you're here. I know that we who are here on a regular basis can look around and see that we've got some pockets of emptiness because it is and has begun the season of the vacationing and the trips. And so we are having folks that we normally have a chance to worship with not here with us today. And it'd be good to give them a call or a card, just let them know that we missed them and hope and pray that their trip is going really well. And we can't wait to see them again real soon. Today we're going to be beginning a series of sermons that the elders have encouraged me to start. We have VBS coming up in about 7 weeks. And for the VBS, the theme this year is Daniel. So the elders thought it would be a good idea for me to preach a series of sermons about Daniel. So we can tie in an adult's message and understand some of the depth to an adult perspective, from an adult perspective, on the life of Daniel, so that it really gets us pumped up for the VBS. And we're going to have our final Daniel sermon on the kickoff morning for VBS. I'm excited about it. We have a VBS meeting, if you haven't heard already, right after worship service. No, it's at what time? 4 o'clock. 4 o'clock today, this afternoon. We need every member of the Sunset congregation to be a part of the VBS team. We need at least 80 volunteers. This is an opportunity to serve the Lord, to serve those kids, that next generation. So please set aside and prioritize some time to serve in the VBS area. This series, I hope, is going to encourage you to become a servant there also. We find out just how amazing the life of Daniel is and the life lessons that we can learn from him. As, if you would, please open your Bibles up to the book of Daniel, chapter 1. Daniel, chapter 1. And while you're turning there, the series is going to be entitled, How to Have a Living Faith in a Dying World. Daniel in his life teaches us some key principles on how to have a living faith in a dying world. Church, we live in a dying world. Dying all around us every single day spiritually. Dying all around us physically. We live in a world that's dying. And what the world needs to see is what it's like to live. And I mean really live for Christ. To have that type of living hope, that living faith that gets excited. To have that dynamic faith that goes, yes, this is what I want to have. I want to be like that. That's what the world needs to see. And to do that, we have to be set apart and different than the rest of the world. How to have this living faith in a dying world. I was thinking about this morning. I'm not a big fan of milk, but I do like milk in my cereal. And as I look at the milk jug, I see that word, it starts with an H. Homogenized, right? And now it's also pasteurized. So pasteurized is when they heat and kill all the germs. The homogenization process is when they take all the particles of the milk out of the cow and they blend it all together. So you have this blended milk. If you did not homogenize the milk, you know what would happen to it? It would separate. And what rises to the top? Oh, yes, you're so smart. The cream rises to the top. We live in a world that wants to homogenize us. They want us to blend it together with them so that we're just all kind of one. And we all look the same, act the same, think kind of the same, and we just need to blend together. But we live in an age where we need to be the cream that rises to the top. And so, church, this first lesson is going to help us try to figure out how to really kind of do both. You see, there is a need for us to blend in sometimes. For us to get along with people in this world, for us to fit into some of their social groups so that we can be influential in their life and we can connect with them and hopefully build relationships with them and then along the way show them this living faith in their dying life. So there are times to blend together, but there are times when we need to make sure that we show ourselves that we are like the cream that rises to the top, set apart. And I think that the number one thing that happens in this area is that people try to get us to compromise to blend in. They try to get us to compromise some things that we think, things that we believe in, things that we do. And it seems to me that we need to be really good at figuring out when to compromise to blend in and when we need to make our stand and rise to the top. Be separate. There's an art to it. There's a craft. There's this wonderful way of being able to be a blended person who's set apart as opposed to somebody who's just going to blend together all the time or be set apart so far that you don't have any influence in the world around you. And Daniel shows us here in Daniel chapter 1 how to compromise and when not to. And that when you don't compromise with somebody, how to go about doing that. Again, like the last series of sermons we had, this is a how-to. If you like taking notes, this is a good note-taking type of series. This is a, how can I live in my world and blend and yet be set apart? How can I know when to compromise and then when not to? And when I don't compromise, what are some things that I can do when I face the situation when somebody calls me out to compromise but I'm not going to? How do I handle that? Daniel chapter 1. I wish this were a class so we could get some good feedback here, but this is the way it is. All right. Daniel chapter 1, starting in verse 1. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the vessels of the house of God. And he brought them to the land of Shinar, to the house of his God. And he brought the vessels into the treasury of his God. Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, the chief of his officials, to bring in some sons of Israel, including of the royal family and of the nobles, youths, in whom was no defect, who were good looking, showing intelligence in every branch of wisdom, endowed with understanding and discerning knowledge, and who had ability in serving the king's court. And he ordered him to teach them literature and language of the Chaldeans. And the king appointed for them a daily ration from the king's choice food and from the wine which he drank, and appointed that they should be educated 3 years, at the end of which they were to enter into the king's personal service. Now among them, the sons of Judah were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Then the commander of the officials assigned new names to them. And to Daniel he assigned the name Belshazzar, to Hananiah, Shadrach, to Mishael, Meshach, and to Azariah, Abednego. Verse 8. But Daniel made up his mind that he would not defile himself with the choice food, or with wine which he drank. So he sought permission from the commander of the officials, that he might not defile himself. We find ourselves 606 BC. Babylon is, well, they're the king of the neighborhood. They got the biggest troops, the strongest soldiers. They've got the best equipment. They are the most powerful nation in the world at this time. And King Nebuchadnezzar is having his army meticulously go through nation to nation, town to town, and besieging it and taking it over. And what I find fascinating about this is that when Nebuchadnezzar's troops come into Jerusalem and wherever they go, Nebuchadnezzar's a smart dude. You know, he wants to make sure that his reign as king and Babylon as the most powerful nation lasts for generations upon generations. And here's his strategy. I'll go into the towns, into the nations, and I'll wipe them out. I'll kill people if I have to. I'll take folks prisoner, that's for sure. But here's what I'm going to also do. I'm going to take captive the young generation. I'm going to take those young minds, those young men, And I'm going to bring them back to Babylon, and I'm going to retrain them and re-educate them to become Babylonians. Now think about this. That if you get rid of the young men and that generation in a nation, where's the next generation going to come from in that nation? So he removes the ability for that particular group to really reproduce a new generation. And the second thing then is that these young minds are still moldable. He knows that. He knows that the younger generation can have their minds changed under the right educational system. Here, it's a 3-year system. Now I want you to think about that in today's society. Isn't that still kind of true? I mean, we've got this warrior out there, Satan, and he has his army, and if he can get a hold of our younger generation, what's going to happen to the next? You see, if he can get this re-educational program, if he can reprogram these young minds to follow things that he teaches, then he wins. And he'll continue to reign as the mighty leader of the world if he can just get to that young generation and remove them and change them. So the battle today is very much the same. Different warriors, different nations, but the same battle. All for the minds of the young. We have a chance in 6 weeks or so to really help the minds of the young with VBS, because they need to have God's truth and His people surround them and equip them to fight this fight. Because the battle is life and death, not just on this earth, but eternal. So here King Nebuchadnezzar, with his intelligence, he knows, I'm going to get a hold of these young guys and I'm going to change them. So there they are. Daniel with his 3 buddies. They're introduced to this whole new society. And notice what they do. They take on new clothing, take on a new house, take on a new educational system. They have a new purpose in their life to go serve the king and his court. And they're offered this new food. And I want you to know that at any time, if any of these men decided to say no to any of these things, any of them, they'd either be tossed into prison or executed. I mean, what purpose are they? They're not going to fall into line. And what I find fascinating is that Daniel and his buddies decide that it's okay to compromise their clothing, their house, their educational system, and the purpose of which they're going to serve. Because I'm pretty sure that these 3 or 4 young men really understood that it doesn't matter what kind of clothing I'm wearing, I still am representing my Lord. That no matter what clothing they put me on and they put me into in this nation, I'm still going to be clothed with my Father. I'm going to serve Him. That, okay, they may put me in a new location, in a new house, but I still serve the house of God. That they may put me into a different educational system, that's fine. I'm still going to have the education I get from God reign supreme. So they were willing to compromise in certain areas to continue to live and survive and thrive and perhaps influence then that nation from within God. But there's one area that they were unwilling to compromise in. It had to do with food. Now to you and I, that sounds pretty silly. I mean, to compromise over other things, but not compromise in the food. And this is the king's food. I mean, this is the best the world has to offer. Who doesn't like a good old pork roast? Man, that sounds pretty juicy and tasty right now. Who's taking me out to lunch? No hands. But yeah, that sounds good. And they have access to the tastiest, best food in the world. And they're going to say no. They're going to reject it. Now, out of all the things to make a stand for and not compromise, why would they do that? Well, because God commanded them not to eat certain food, and they were not going to bend, they were not going to break, they were not going to compromise, they were going to follow the yes and the no from God. What they wore, where they went to school, where they lived, those things they had the freedom to compromise and change. But how they lived their life in this area, God said no, and that meant that it was no for them. So the first step, church, in this idea of trying to know when to blend in and when not to, is to know when to blend in and when not to. You have to know and evaluate situations to figure out whether it's okay with God that you make some adjustments or whether He says no. And it's vitally important because, remember, the enemy is out there trying to get us to compromise in all these areas. So what we need to understand is what God says goes. His yes is my yes. His no is my no. And I need to evaluate the situation and all the multiple layers, because when you're dealing with people, there's usually multiple layers when they're asking us to compromise. And I've got to figure out if I need to say no to this because there's multiple layers. And if I say yes to this one, it's going to lead me to something I need to say no at, but I'm already invested and I've already started it, so I might as well just go ahead and give it all. We need to know when to say yes and to say no, and evaluate each situation accordingly. Because usually when we say yes to something we should say no to, it will affect more than just one thing. I'll give you a quick example. Let's just say you've got a friend who's been a friend of yours for a long, long time. And they knew you back in the day, back before you were a Christian. But then, they know that you're now a Christian. But you've, of course, maintained your friendship and your relationship. You still hang out and do fun things together. And this guy is trying to help and embrace your new faith, your new religion, your new belief system. So he goes and sees this movie at the movie theater. And he loves this movie. I mean, your friend just loves it. And he comes to you and says, listen, man, I want to see this movie with you. Because it has this religious theme in it. And the Bible is shown in it. And it's this great movie that I would just love to share with you almost as a Christian thing together. Almost as an evangelistic thing. That's the way you might be hearing it, like, wow, he's really interested in the Bible because he just said the Bible's in this movie. But your friend goes on to say, well, it does have some foul language in it. I don't know how many times or all the words, but it does, but it won't take away from the movie. I mean, really, the effect is still there. Okay, there's some skin scenes, but it's not really, they don't last all that long. But I want you to experience this religious movie with me. So now you try to think, well, what do I do? This young man just learned that his body is the temple of the Holy Spirit. And that means that God lives inside of him. And he's learned enough to know that the Lord doesn't want any dirt and filth to enter into his temple. It makes him sick. And you know that foul language, and on purpose introducing foul language into the mind and into the heart, you're then allowing this stuff to enter into the temple on purpose. And you know that you're going to dirty the temple. Oh, and then the skin things that your eyes are not supposed to see because it's not your wife. But for the greater good of the relationship, maybe I should compromise. And so you decide to. And you go to the movie. Now, what did it cost you? Just the compromise of going to the movie and feeling a little embarrassed when those words come up and the skin scenes show up, or is there more to it than that? Yeah, there's more to it. I mean, not only is the temple now had, dirt introduced that shouldn't have been, but you actually paid money for it. I don't know about you, but $20 or so is still a lot of money to me. How about you? I mean, $20 is still $20. You could do quite a bit if you do it right with $20. I mean, maybe give it to the Lord on a Sunday. So it cost you not only that embarrassment, but now it's cost you money out of your pocket, and then it's 2 or 3 hours that you'll never get back that you could have used to help serve God in a different way, but it didn't happen, so now it's cost you your time. And then, oh, by the way, it's also cost you the ability to show your friend a living faith in a dying world. And it's now hindered your ability to evangelize him because now in his mind, that was a Christian movie. And you authorized it as so by saying yes and going. Church, we have to be the type of people that say no when we're supposed to say no. But we also have the room to say yes in certain areas. I'll give you a church example. There are plenty out there in the world. I mean, as far as clothing and where to eat supper and all that kind of stuff. There's a whole bunch of areas that we can compromise in. But I'll give you one here in the house of God. When I was in preaching school years ago, there was a story that went around the classroom of this young man who was raised in a very small congregation in an isolated part of Texas. And his congregation, every time that somebody prayed, an opening prayer, closing prayer, Lord's Supper, every member of the congregation got out of their seats, got onto their knees, bowed their heads, and folded their hands for the prayer. Some people even got out of the pews and got into the middle aisle, and they got on their knees and then laid their face flat to the ground. This was every time a prayer was prayed. It's what the young man was taught. He was taught that, yes, the most important thing to bow down before the King of Kings is our mind and our heart, that we should bow ourselves humbly before the Master as we come to Him in prayer. He understood that the internal was far more important than the external. But he also was taught that the external sometimes can help the internal. That sometimes if you get your body in that right position, that uncomfortable position, sometimes it helps the mind and heart get to where it needs to be. So he grows up with some gifts and talents. He starts preaching for that small congregation. And man, he's good. So the members of the congregation encourage him, you need to preach the gospel for a living. So they start looking through papers and things like that, and they find out that there's this larger congregation in a bigger city in Texas that's looking for a preacher. So he goes. He and his wife and his 2 kids. They get there, and guess what? Opening prayer. And you know what they do? What they've always been taught to do. Fold their hands, bow their heads, get off the pew, get on their knees and pray. Now some of the members in the immediate area, they notice this. They're not on their knees. They're not out of their pew. And they notice that this potential preacher is on the ground. It made them feel uncomfortable. Well, he eventually gets up to preach, and they love him. They just love him. So they offer him the job. He starts the very next week, and he does the same thing for every prayer, and more people are talking. More and more people are noticing. When the prayer's about to happen, some folks are doing this. Is he going to do it again? And he and his family do. So instead of talking to the preacher and his wife, they didn't. They went straight to the elders. You handle it. See, we have a problem. They're kneeling down during prayer. So the elders addressed the wife and the husband and said, listen, we know the scriptures teach the multiple positions, and we know that you have every right to bow and to kneel and to pray with your hands folded. We know that. But we're a congregation that needs to, well, we need you to be patient with us. And we need you to just for now stay in your pew, bow your head and pray with us, but please don't get on your knees. And then teach us as time goes on. Teach us that yes, it's the position of the mind, it's the position of the heart, and the position of the body can be in multiple positions to pray before the Father. But for now, will you compromise? Well, the man was smart. His wisdom said yes. Because he knew there was a greater good. Did he have to pray on his knees? No. Could he pray sitting in the pew? Yep. Did he have the right to do it either way? Sure did. But for the good of the body and the opportunity to teach, he and his wife and children sat in that pew the next week, and the week after, and the week after. You see, there are some times when we, brothers and sisters, need to compromise for the greater good. We may have the right to do something, but it may not be the right thing to do at the time. And then there are some things we need to stand firm on and say, there's absolutely no way I'm ever going to do that. We need to know the difference. So that leads us then to the next step. What happens then? Because when you compromise in an area, it works itself out because, well, you've compromised. You've already worked the details out. But what about those times when somebody asks you to do something and you say no? What next? Well, you need to make up your mind that you're not going to change anything about what you think or feel about it. Because if God says it, you're going to stick with it. And there's a whole world out there that wants you to be, well, just softened a little. Just change one thing. It's not like, you know where that first intimate thing that you shouldn't be doing before you get married, you know where it starts with? A little hand touch and a kiss. It starts with a little thing. No, I'm not going to do that before I get married. Oh, I understand, honey, the boy says. And then he holds her. What are you doing? Well, I'm just holding your hand. Is that okay? Well, I guess so. Is that lip gloss that you're wearing? Your lips look so tasty. Just one little kiss. Most folks are uncomfortable because y'all went through the same thing back in the teenage years now, didn't you? It's bubblegum flavor. No! You mind if I have a taste? Okay. It's where it starts, amen, church? Where you know that what the Lord says is what the Lord says, but then if you just bend just a little, it'll lead to a break. In verse 8, it says, Daniel made up his mind that he was not going to eat from the king's select food. And that meant not. That meant whatever consequences come up, I'm going to take them. But it is not going to get me to have a little taste of the pork. Not going to do it. Not going to sip the juice. Not going to put my nose into the smell. I'm not going to have it on my table. It's not showing up. That made up your mind has the idea of multiple strands of string twisted together to multiple strands of string to create a rope that no matter how much pressure is put on that rope, it will not break. Church, we need to make up our minds that when God says yes, we're going to say yes no matter what the world says. When God says no, we are going to say no, no matter what they throw our way. It's bubblegum. We're going to say no. Because we have to choose sides. The story about this young man during the Civil War, he lived in a border town. So he had family and friends that both were fighting for the Union and the Confederates. And so he's being encouraged by both sides. You need to join the war. You need to select your cause and fight for the cause. Well, this kid didn't really want to fight. He didn't want to die. So he came up with a plan. He found a Union jacket and Confederate pants and went to the battle and got shot by both sides. Church, we can't do that. We can't wear the coat of one and the pants of another. When it comes to the things that we know God says no to, we have to make our stand and not bend. But to do that, that means we're going to have to be strong because the people that we know and the people that we love, they have great influence and Satan's pretty creative and they're going to try to come up with, and your friends don't even know this, but this is the way it works. They're going to try to come up with a way for you just to shift just a little. We can't. I told this story to the adult class, I think, several weeks ago, and I'm thankful for it. Ed Wharton is one of the instructors at the Sunset International Bible Institute where I went to school, and he's written several books of which we've used some here. And Ed Wharton had taught me, and I'm thankful. I received straight A's throughout my college career. I got one B, and it was from Ed Wharton. And I understand why. Ed Wharton was a man who wanted it done to the letter. He didn't want to have one letter off, one misspelling, one incorrect use of whatever. He wanted it done perfectly. To the best of our ability, he wanted it done right. And when you didn't, he checked you off on it. And yes, I have to admit, I went to his house a couple of times, really upset. How did you give me a B here? I got all the answers right. Yes, but you misspelled 3 words in the sentence. What difference does it make? I asked for perfect spelling. He taught me the details matter. In church, it matters when it comes to this. When God says it, He says it with detail. We need to know those details and follow it. We don't have, it takes the guesswork out. So when He says no, we say no. Step number 3. We need to be the type of people that avoid a confrontation by being patient and kind in the midst of that moment. You see, many times when somebody wants something, somebody else says that they want something else, can very quickly turn into an arguing thing. It can turn into an enemy deal. It can turn into hatred, and we can have friends turn to enemies pretty quickly. Have you ever experienced that? And so that means that we need to do everything that we can within our power to follow what the example here with Daniel is, and that is that we need to not be confrontational when people ask us to compromise. I want you to look to the end of verse 8 again with me. So he sought permission from the commander of the officials that he might not defile himself. What we don't find Daniel doing is, all right, I'll take the clothing, I'll take the education, I'll take the new house, I'll take the new life plan, but I'm not going to eat of the Lord or of the king's table. And the commander then says, yes, you are. We don't find Daniel saying, fine, I'm going on a hunger strike. Huh, take that. We don't see him do that. We don't see him, well, really? You're going to make me eat? Really? Make this, buddy? We don't see it. We don't see any of this, I'm going to fight back at you because you're trying to tell me to do something I don't want to do. Church, we have enough enemies out there in the world because they don't like us. Let's not make more by showing them that we don't like them. It's not supposed to work that way. And we need to have a very concise, smart, humble, quiet approach when we're in the midst of a situation that could turn into a confrontation because we're going to make our stand and not budge, and they're going to try to get us to budge, and we're not going to. As far as it is from our side, we're going to be at peace with all men. Because that's the mentality that we're going to have. You ever hear of the Hatfields and McCoys? Yeah, I know that there was this TV special on a week or so ago. I didn't watch it because I heard that there's going to be foul language in it, so I didn't watch it. But it intrigued me enough to at least get into studying. So I started doing some research on the Hatfields and McCoys. And it started with a confrontation because of the death of somebody connected to the Civil War in one of the families. But it also was an argument over a pig. A pig! They fought over a pig! Somebody got killed over a pig! I mean, talk about foolish. They didn't work things out. They didn't have this joy or peace or patience or kindness or understanding. They stood their ground with fighting words right away and not talking. By the way, I don't know if you know this or not, but the elder statesman, the patriarch of the Hatfield family, was a member of the Lord's church. Baptized about 10 years before he died. Church of Christ preacher baptized Mr. Hatfield. Yeah. By the way, his nickname was Devil. So the preacher is quoted as saying, I'm the only man that had a chance to baptize the devil. I thought that was pretty cool. But we can't start a Hatfield-McCoy thing. That's not our position in place because we want all men to be saved. And there's no way we're going to save all men if we decide to just go nose to nose, toe to toe about things like this. Oh, we're not going to budge. Daniel wasn't. If it's going to cost him his life, then so be it. It's going to cost him his life. But as far as he was concerned, he was going to try to approach it with this love and this grace, this patience and kindness, because what he wanted to show the Babylonian king is God. He wanted to show the Babylonian people that when you follow the Lord's way, things really work out better. So then that leads us to that next step. That he then begins this discussion. Verse 9. Now God granted Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the commander because of why? Because he handled the situation right. It wasn't confrontational. He didn't lash out with anger. He wanted to talk things through. Wasn't going to change the way he thought. Verse 10, and the commander of the officials said to Daniel, I'm afraid of my lord the king, who has appointed your food and drink. For why should he see your faces looking more haggard than the youths who are your own age? Then you would make me forfeit my head to the king. You hear his argument? Man, the king's way, the world's way, that's the best way. And what are the other people going to think if you're allowed to do this and you're going to look different than them? And there's no way that you're going to turn out better because, well, we know best. Do you hear that in the world? The way they try to teach our kids? Oh, listen, that old church fuddy-duddy way, that's not the best way. That's the old way. Here's the new way. Come and do it our way. That will make you look really good. We need to be the type of people that stand up like Daniel and say, listen, I appreciate that. I appreciate those words of advice, but I'm not going to do it that way. I'm going to try it this way. And when I try it this way, let's see the difference between the way other kids our age look and the way I look. Church, can you imagine if we could get our younger kids to really buy into the plan of Jesus? If we could really encourage them with the way that we live? If we're living a compromised life, then what do you think our kids are going to do? They're learning how to compromise in areas they shouldn't. If they hear us or see us in church, and amen, that part where the preacher said, you know that nasty language stuff in that skin scene, but they know what kind of DVDs you have in your house. Why are they going to listen to you? You've already sold out. How are you going to convince them? We need to be people who don't compromise in areas that we shouldn't either. And show them that it's the better way. And do it with passion and compassion and love and patience and kindness. That they see that we're not confrontational people. How do you get along with your wife, men? Women, how do you get along with your husband? How do you get along with your friends and family? Do they hear you gossip? Do they hear you slander? Do they hear you fighting? Are they seeing how you work it out in your life with people? That you follow these steps? That there's a place and home of peace and reason and conversation and not anger and separation and division. Our kids need to see it in us first. And so Daniel's trying to get this commander to see that if you just give me the chance, if you just allow me the opportunity, I'll show you that God's way is better. And I think that's a great way to approach a confrontation or a situation like this with a friend or a family member. Hey, listen, if you just give me some time, just let me show you the way the Lord's way is and how good it is. And so he did it. And he allowed it. Verse 11, but Daniel said to the overseer from whom the commander of the officials had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, please test your servants for 10 days. And let us be given vegetables to eat and water to drink. And let our appearance be observed in your presence. And the appearance of the youths who are eating the king's choice food. And deal with your servants according to what you see. Verse 14. So he listened to them in this matter and tested them for 10 days. Church, tested. We're going to be tested. Verse 15, and at the end of the 10 days, their appearance seemed better. And they were fatter than all the youths who had been eating the king's choice food. So the overseer continued to withhold the choice food and the wine they were to drink, and kept giving them vegetables. And if you read the rest of chapter 1, you'll find out how God blessed Daniel and his friends for not compromising in the areas that they shouldn't. Compromising in the areas that they should. And I want you to know this for absolute certain, that God wants you to be blessed also. That when we do what he says financially, when we do what he says when it comes to food and eating, when we do what he says when it comes to marriage and friendships and family, when we do what he says, it's amazing how blessed our life will be. He'll bless it. if we follow the true king's choice, then we're good to go. Everything else will work out, including those potential confrontations. They'll work out. People will see then what a living faith looks like in this dying world. It'll work out. And so as we move forward in this life of Daniel, let's never forget where this whole journey begins, where Daniel being put into a whole new world, whole new situation, and he had to make some big life decisions, and he was willing to be blended in some, but he was going to stand firm and rise to the top in others. Let's do the same. We offer an invitation every Sunday, and here's the invitation today. Maybe, just maybe, you have allowed your life to get blended when it should have been set apart. And maybe you're feeling overwhelmed because of the sin and the decisions that you've made, or the consequences that you face right now, because you've allowed yourself to do and be a part of things that you know in your heart of hearts you should have been a part of. Maybe the movie scenario was something that, well, yes, maybe just recently, yes. Maybe it was a conversation. Maybe it was a job or business decision where you know that you set aside God's truth. Perhaps it was, well, it was just a little lie. It's still a lie. And maybe you allowed yourself to be compromised in certain areas of your life, and you know right now that your relationship with Jesus now has been compromised. And you need to ask God to forgive you, to clean you, to lift you up, and to lift you up. So we're going to stand and sing a song of invitation, and as we do, we invite you, those of you who are members of the Lord's church, to come forward if you need to be cleansed and lifted up. Those of you who are not members of the Lord's church, but you desire to give your life to Jesus, we invite you to come forward to give your life to Christ and be baptized into Him as we sing the song of invitation.
Have I no way?